Mr. Gorley.
Thank you, Your Honor. If it please the court, counsel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Just glad I was telling you good morning today and not last night, right? That was a long process last night. Okay, the opening statement is what we give to you as to a roadmap as to what we think the evidence is going to show in this case. And in that, we want you to pay particular attention to things that we think are important that are going to come forward to you. And one of the things that I would like to direct your attention to is something that the state said in regards to this, and that is accounts are allowed to have differences. Okay, and I'd ask you when the evidence comes out to pay attention to the differences in the accounts. Additionally, I would ask you to pay attention to the background as to why there may be differences in accounts. The relationship between Maisha Barrow and Miss Kendrick in this case. They had a long-standing feud, and that's the evidence will come out. They don't like each other. Same is true with Mr. Kendrick and Mr. Barrow. They don't like each other either. And that is some of the evidence that you will be receiving in this case. Additionally, you're going to learn about the fight outside. You may hear accounts about Mrs. Kendrick, Dee Dee Kemp, using pepper spray on individuals, including security guards outside. But you're also going to hear from an individual who was the closest to my client at the time that the shots came out. His name is Kiera Scott. And you're going to see Mr. Scott on cell phone videos that were taken at the time. And what you're going to see from Mr. Scott, and so you understand Mr. Scott, he is bigger. My client's a large man. Kiera is bigger than him. He outweighs him, he's taller, and he's stronger than him. And you're going to see from cell phone videos, Kiera Scott holding him back, telling him to calm down, get away, you don't need to do this, as this argument is occurring. The evidence is going to be presented to you from Mr. Scott, and he's going to tell you that he was with Quan at the time that the shots came out. And when the shots started firing, everybody went to ducking. He's going to tell you Quan never went to a car to get a gun, never went to a truck to get a gun, never fired a gun in any way whatsoever. And he knows that because he was right there. And when you see the video, you'll be able to see him holding Mr. Barrow back from this fight. He doesn't want to see a fight take place. You're also going to hear from several witnesses about statements that were made before the shots occurred. Mr. Scott is going to be one of those individuals, in addition to other people that may tell you that before the shots were fired, somebody said, y'all better back up, y'all better back up, y'all better back up. And then gunfire erupted. Mr. Scott, from the video that you're able to see, and from his testimony, is next to and around keeping Mr. Barrow away from Mr. Kendrick. You're going to hear testimony from other witnesses about what happened once those shots fired, where Mr. Barrow was in relation to that. And they're going to tell you, these witnesses, that he was behind with them, ducking behind a car as everyone else was. So when you listen to the evidence, listen to the differences in testimony, but also trust what you see and trust what you understand in evaluating witnesses. Because Mr. Barrow never possessed a gun that night. Mr. Barrow never fired a gun that night. Mr. Barrow never encouraged anybody to fire a gun that night. He's not guilty of the charges that he's accused of. Now, the state is correct. There are facts that are certain, that are constant. There was a nightclub. These people, my client was in the nightclub. There was a altercation in the nightclub. My client was in the nightclub during the altercation. Two girls got into a fight. Those facts are constant. The fight continued outside. Those facts are constant. But what also is constant is Mr. Scott stopping Mr. Barrow from interacting with Mr. Kendrick because he did not want a fight to take place. And you're going to be able to evaluate Mr. Scott's testimony in relation to other individuals that may have motives as to why their testimony differs or why they gave different testimony at different times. And it may be the relationship that they have with the victim, or it may be the relationship that they have with not liking my client, or it may be the relationship that they have with liking Mr. Kendrick, or feeling sorry for Benitria. But when you're listening and evaluating testimony, please focus in on the differences as to these statements that they gave, and focus in on the statements of the people that were closest to Mr. Barrow at the time that this occurred. Evaluate their testimony in regards to how they testified and how it compares to the other witnesses' testimony, because that's your job. And that's what we're asking you to do, is to evaluate testimony and come to a decision based on what you hear from the witness stand. And that's all we can ask in any case. If you do that and you understand the facts and circumstances and compare the testimony of individuals in this case, your verdict is going to be very easy for you. Mr. Barrow is not guilty of shooting Benitra Robinson. He's not guilty of any of the attempted murders because he simply was not in possession of a gun at the time that all this shooting took place. Thank you.
Ms. Hawthorne?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. September 12, 2015, Cloud9 was preparing for a busy entertainment event that night. They didn't plan on overwhelming club attendance. They didn't have any off-duty police officers. They had security personnel on staff. They had bartenders, they had waitresses and servers, they had a DJ, they had a camera near the front door, and the club was overcrowded, just like Ms. Kipke told you. People were mulling around inside and outside. Cloud9 is a nightclub in Ocala that's just north of a establishment called Murphy's Oyster Bar, it used to be. And across the street is a McDonald's and a Brazilian steakhouse called Churrascaria. On that evening, Gene Smith, Michael Eugene Smith, my client, he was there. He wasn't really dressed up like all the other people. He was wearing a tank top and some basketball shorts. He didn't have a gun. He was seen by the cameras in the front of the establishment. You will see videos of the chaos that occurred once the commotion was driven outside, after the fights began inside, as Mr. Gorley described to you, because of the long-standing history between Maisha Barrow and Dee Dee Kendrick, and then her brother, Mr. Barrow, interceded to try to pull them apart. Another person got in to try to pull them apart, and pretty soon they had a melee inside the club. Security shut it all down, said, okay, let's get out. There was a lot of physical movement, a lot of yelling. You're going to hear the testimony of various witnesses as to what happened inside the club. My client, Gene, was not in that club. Not in the club during the fight. He was outside. When the people were moved outside and the club was getting ready to shut down because everything was out of control, the parking lot became overwhelmed. Cars, people talking, people arguing, people yelling, drugs, alcohol, people all hyped up from what was going on. You will hear the different accounts of what went on inside and what went on outside. Like Mr. Gorley said, there were some words that were being exchanged by Nate Kendrick and Mr. Barrow. Where was Mr. Smith? He wasn't around. He was outside, but he wasn't involved in that. And all of a sudden, you hear the shots. And you're going to be able to hear the shots as they were recorded on the police officer's body cam video. And you'll see their physical reaction running towards what was going on, and the chaos, the screaming, the yelling, the people who had been shot asking for help, the officers trying to get some order out of this chaos. And it was a melee, totally unprepared. Officers screaming over their mics for help. Send officers, send medics. We need help. People in the streets just trying to figure out what was going on, people running, people leaving the scene, cars driving away. That's what happened with Gene. He left. He wasn't there. He didn't have a gun, and he didn't shoot anybody. The witnesses will come in. They will tell you what they believe they remember. Listen carefully, like Mr. Gorley told you, like we're all probably going to tell you. Compare and contrast what you hear. Watch the witness, listen to what they have to say to you. Look at the videotapes. See if their testimony matches with what you see on those videotapes. And then you'll be able to make your decision like Mr. Gorley said. It will be easy. And you will be able to find Gene not guilty. Thank you.
Mr. Pankowitz?
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to rehash what 3 other people have said. I'm only going to ask you to listen to the evidence. Listen to the witnesses. The defense in this case for Mr. King is going to put on witnesses. Herbert Welcome and Genuvio Collins, both of whom were with Mr. King outside the club after the chaos and during the chaos. Both of these people are going to tell you he had no gun, he fired no gun. Listen to all of the witnesses. Listen to their versions, as the other attorneys have told you, and weigh their testimony with each and every person's testimony. Look at it, everything, before you make any kind of decision. Yes, there was chaos, but no one that we will present to you will tell you that Gary King had a gun or that he shot anyone. In fact, I believe the testimony is going to show inside the club he was trying to be a peacemaker. He was trying to break up the fight between the ladies in the club. And as a result of his attempted peacemaking, he got thrown out of the club, and that's when all the chaos arose. So please listen to the evidence, listen to the witnesses, weigh their credibility, weigh the factors like what do they have to gain, what do they have to lose. Look at their backgrounds. These are all determining factors in credibility. And this whole case comes down to credibility. What was seen, what was not seen, listen to everything, please. It's very important to all 3 of these gentlemen. You've got to weigh the evidence, weigh the credibility of the witnesses, and we believe when you do, that you will find that Gary King is not guilty.